Let's get started with the idea of endgames. What makes a game an endgame? The idea of an endgame is that there are few pieces on the board. Okay, there's a bunch of books out there for endgames. You got things like this, Silman's Complete Course, which is great. Basic Chess Endgames, thick book, lots of details. You got smaller books, just the facts, but high level knowledge. So where do you start? How do you get started with learning endgames? What are we even talking about when we say endgame? What does that even mean? Like, what are we talking about? So what we're saying is, this is the idea from Grandmaster Lev Albert. The endgame is the stage of the game with a relatively few pieces. Doesn't tell you a whole lot. So let's get in a little deeper. What we're saying is that the endgame is going to favor an aggressive king, so that means the king has to be involved in your game. Passed pawns are hugely important in an endgames, and often the idea of Zugzwang. So the idea of Zugzwang is that because you can't pass your turn, chess is a game where you can't just say pass, I don't want to go, pass, nope, you can't do that. You have to move. You are compelled to move. And so because you're compelled to move, you can get moved into a worse position because you have to go. You can actually move yourself into a worse position. So the idea here is that Zugzwang is something that can happen in an endgame. It doesn't really happen in the middle game. It can't really happen in the opening. There's just too many pieces and too many good moves. But in the endgame, you can have a bad position and you can make that position worse. When we talk about endgames, we need to be able to find mate. We have to be able to see, what does that checkmate look like? There are a few checkmate positions that every person who plays chess should know and see and know what it looks like. This is for the people that are sub 800, sub 500. You just started learning how to play the game and you're not even really sure, like you're winning the game and you can't finish it. So this is where you are. The idea of stacking and winning when you have just more material than any but the other guy. Okay, so we'll put a black king here. We'll put the white king over here in the corner. He's not going to do much for these first couple. So let's say you've got two queens. We have a queen here and a queen here. With these two queens on the board, right now, this is checkmate. So this is a position that we can set up, and you can see that the way these two queens look right now, they kind of look like a staircase because there's a little step between them, and they've set this up. And so this is what we've called the staircase mate. You can do this mate with queens. We can also do the same mate. We'll put the king back here on the back rank with two rooks. Okay. So if you put your rook on the back rank and you have it supported by the rank on the 7th, a rook on the 7th, what we have is this nice position where we're taking away all of the squares in front of the king, all of the squares to either side, and giving check with just the two rooks. Okay, so two rooks, two queens, or maybe even a queen and a rook. So if you are up so much material that you're up a queen and a rook, or two queens, or two rooks, this is a case where you can win the game and your king doesn't even need to be involved. You are dominating this game so much that your two pieces can work together and finish this. How do we do it? I've shown you what the setup looks like. So what happens when it's not already on the board? Well, so let's start with the rooks back here, and let's start here. King's in the middle of the board, okay? So looking at this position, what we can do, white to move here, we are going to push, we are going to slowly stack and push the king to the back of the board. Are there faster checkmates? Yes. There is absolutely a faster engine line. Table base will tell you that it's probably a mate in like 6. Here, well, let's ask. Not that it matters even a little bit. Mate in 5, okay? Does it matter? No, it does not matter that it's a mate in 5. You need to know how to checkmate. It doesn't matter that it's not the fastest mate. Winning is winning, okay? Winning is winning, and you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be an engine, okay? Just play good moves. We need to be able to create the checkmate when we don't have it already on the board. White to move, and I know there's going to be a faster way to do it. I don't care. I still don't care, okay? So what we're going to do, take away the position from the king, okay? Move the queen into play. All of these squares are now taken away. The king has to move. It doesn't matter where the king moves. Stay in the center of the board, okay? If you're on the black side, if you have the choice of where to move, stay to the center of the board. Make it as difficult as possible for your opponent to checkmate you. That's the idea. So what we'll do here is we'll add the rook now. 2 pieces working together. You can't checkmate somebody with 1 piece. It has to have at least 2 pieces to deliver checkmate. So king has to clear this rank. It can't go forward, and so the king is going to move back. Can't go to d6, so we'll continue this process of taking away row after row, just slowly rolling the king back to the back row until we get that position that we set up a few moments ago. So keep rolling this king further and further back, and there's the checkmate. The rook takes away the front row, the queen takes away the back. Done. This is checkmate, okay? If you had 2 queens, it would work the same. If you have 2 rooks, it works the same mostly. So let's take a look at that, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look when we have 2 rooks, okay? So slightly different. In reality, it's not going to be too different, but it is worth paying a little bit of attention to, okay? So basic position. Okay, so we just talked about how to do this with a queen and a rook. It would work exactly the same with 2 queens. If you have 2 rooks and we're facing a lone king, most of these moves are going to be the same. Okay, start off, take away the row in front of the king. Okay, so take away that front space. The king's got to move somewhere. As I told you, there, that's fine. King's got to stay in the middle of the board. Okay? If you are the black side, stay as close to the middle of the board as you can is generally the advice. Here, white is going to go ahead and continue to take away these rows, take away the row. Now, the king has to retreat, but this is where the position changes a little bit for 2 rooks versus just a queen and a rook. The king can actually fight back a little bit. When this rook slides back for check in this position, the king could take it. Okay? I've seen beginners who go, oh, I learned this idea of rolling the king, and they lose the rook and go, how did I lose? How could I possibly lose? I was up so much material, and they end up with a draw when they shouldn't. Okay, so what you have to realize is that with those rooks, they can't protect each other as they're rolling up the board, so we need to keep the rooks as far away from the king as possible. So now when the king is moving down the board, we can, here, actually, let's stick to our principles. Don't help them out if you can. So here we go, slide over. We've got this taken away. Now we're going to push the king further back. Here's another opportunity for that white rook to be captured. If you're not paying attention, if you're on autopilot, the king's just going to capture. So slide the rook to the other side of the board. Now you have plenty of time. You're going to be able to roll that king all the way up. The king's going to try and make this as hard as possible, so spend some time running back over, but he's not going to get there in time. Boom, checkmate. Okay, so this is a very common pattern that you should know. If you are just beginning to play chess, this is a pattern you should practice, you need to know, set it up on a board, play against the computer, do it till you can do it without thinking. Okay, you need to have this pattern down, this idea of rolling up the board. Okay, no matter what, practice it, set it up on a chessboard, play your little brother, play your dad, it doesn't matter, practice it, get good at it. okay? This is a bare minimum. If you want to play chess, you got to know how to checkmate when you're winning all the way. All right, so let's add another tool to our toolbox, okay? So what happens? You're dominating the position again. You've completely won this game. You have a king and you have a queen, okay? You have a king and a queen here. If you have a king and a queen, you should be winning this game. Can you lose this game? No. Can you draw this game? Yes. You can get stalemate. You can end up not getting that full point, and that would be a really disappointing way to end a game when you're up a queen. So how does checkmate look in this case? Well, there's two patterns you should know. Okay? Chess is about pattern recognition. So the more patterns you recognize, the better off you'll be. So the two patterns that you're going to need to know is this idea of face to face, so like nose to nose, face to face, and check from the side. Okay? So what we do is we set this up. The king here, our king here on G6 is taking away the three squares in front of the king. Okay, so that's why we're doing face to face. Okay, they're face to face, they can't pass each other, and then the check from the side comes in over here. So there's your check from the side. We have face to face, check from the side, and that gives us a nice clean checkmate. Now we could do this same checkmate with a rook, face to face, and check from the side. Okay, so this pattern you can use with rooks and queens. Now, there's one other pattern that comes up with queens. The other pattern that you'll see with a queen is what I sometimes call a kissmate. Okay, so again, we have the face to face, and now the queen comes in and delivers checkmate right there in between, giving the kiss of death. Mwah, death. Okay, so queen right here is taking away all of the flight squares, gives check, and the king is protecting the white queen. Okay, so this can happen anywhere on the board, anywhere on the edge of the board. Can you deliver checkmate in the middle of the board with just a king and a queen? No, you can't. There is no way to set up a position where you would have checkmate in the middle of the board. So what that means is if you're going to give checkmate, you need to drive that king to the edge of the board to be able to mate, to win. So you're already up the material. You've proven that you're the better player. But if you can't give checkmate, you can't win. And if you can't win, are you really the better player? Well, after watching this and studying and practicing it a little bit, yes, you can be the better player and you can prove it. Okay, so let's see what this looks like in practice. Have our king here in the middle of the board, our queen. You know what? Let's do this with the rook. This would work with a king and a rook, or a king and a queen. We'll show it with the rook just because it'll be a little slower and the pattern will work in either case. Okay, so here's our position and our idea. The idea that we're trying to apply here is called the box. Okay, so we're going to close the box on this king. We want to move our rook in such a way that it shrinks the box that the king can move. Okay, so this king has all these squares, all of these squares it can roam around in. Okay, so that whole box there, this red box that they're in, these are all squares that this black king can go. And the smaller we make that box as we push it to the edge of the board, that's where checkmate can happen. Okay, so black king comes over, says if I take that rook, it's a draw. I'll be happy with a draw. I'm down a rook. So of course black is like, yes, stalemate, draw, insufficient material, those are good for me. So if you can't safely shrink the box, move the king over. Bring the king in. As I started earlier, Lev Albert says that you need to have an active king or an aggressive king in an endgame. That's what makes an endgame, is that you have an aggressive king. There's an expression, who is it? The king is a powerful piece, so use it. That's a quote from Reuben Fine. Okay? So these great players, these grandmasters, know that in the endgame, your king is no longer a liability, but an asset. You have to use it. So we bring the king in. Black's got to move. Black's got to step out of the way. Shrink the box if you can, if it's safe. So we shrink the box. Here, the king keeps moving. Now, this would be a mistake. Do not keep shrinking the box. There's stalemate. Chop it up. 50-50. Draw. You don't like that. That's really disappointing from White's perspective. So keep activating your king. Bring the king over. Keep activating it. Move it over. Here, Black is fighting. He's trying not to lose this game. So if you can't shrink the box, activate the king. Keep bringing the king over. Here, now the king's got to move. Shrink the box. The king's got to move. Shrink the box if you can, safely. Okay? Now, when we look at this, if the king goes to the B file, they're half a step from being mated. So from Black's perspective, we want to avoid the back rank as much as possible, okay? So if you're defending, these are the ideas that you want to have. You don't want to go to the back rank. You want to stay to the middle of the board. These four squares here are where you want to try and stay if you can. Now, obviously, White's pushing Black out of it, and yes, that's the goal. So we'll stay as close as we can. Now, if I give check, I let the Black king back in the middle of the board, and I got to start all over. So that's the wrong idea. What we want to do, if we can't safely shrink the box, that wouldn't have shrank the box. Here's the box. Right now, I can't shrink it safely, so what I'll do is I'll activate the king. I'll bring it in. I'm trying to push the king to the side of the board. King comes over. Activate the king. Shrink the box. King comes over. Keep shrinking that box. Okay? As we continue to press and push the king forward, activate the king. Activate the king. Okay? We're just slowly pushing this king to the side of the board. At this point, the king has no choice. It's got to go to the second rank. So here we go. It's now on the second rank. Let's close this box as much as we can, continuing to shrink that position, and we're going to go ahead and push in. Okay, so we're slowly pushing the king to the edge of the board. It's got to make a choice. Here we go. And so now, if you're not careful, there's some stalemate opportunities here. We'll talk about what those stalemate chances are. For now, let's finish what the mate should look like. Here we go. Activate the king. The rook couldn't close the box very well. So activate the king. King can come over. Close out that flight square. King to the center. And there is the pattern that we talked about a few minutes ago. Face to face. Face to face, and then check from the side. Okay, so there's that pattern again. With a queen, it would have been just a pinch faster because you can take away those diagonals. The queen has easier movements, and the queen can move without being checked. So let's take a look at some of the stalemates. What do we want to avoid when we're doing this? Okay, so if we want to avoid some things, so let's go ahead. We'll throw our king in the corner here. Okay, that's one of those things that we're going to pay attention to. Is when the king's in the corner, there's more opportunities for stalemate because these positions can creep in a little more often. So White king, taking away the two squares from the king, and then if your queen is in here in the mix, this is stalemate. Black to move. There's nowhere that Black king can go. can't come here, can't come here, can't come here. Black is unable to move. This is stalemate. And because black is not in check, this is considered a draw. If you have overwhelming material and you force the position into a place where no one can move, black can't move, the game's over and it's a draw. No one won, no one lost. But if you have the queen, that would be a disappointing result. All right, so let's look at another endgame that you might have that you could look at. Okay, so let's set up that position, clear the board. Again, let's stick the king in the corner. Here, we have the king taking away some squares, getting ready to maybe slide over like we just had and deliver that checkmate. But where's the rook? Well, if the rook is in the wrong place, this is a disaster. Okay, so let's put the rook right here. Okay, with the rook here, the rook is taking away both flight squares. The king protects the rook, and right now we have our king sitting on A1, not in check. And if the king's not in check and it can't move, it's stalemate. So this would be another opportunity that you could have stalemate on the board and accidentally not win the game with an overwhelming material advantage. Let's look at one more of these. Again, let's stick the king in the corner. You can see that the corner is a dangerous place for stalemate, so pay attention when that happens. So there's the king. Here we have the other king. Face to face, we look like we're all set. Now, if this rook is sitting on the b file, takes away all of the squares. The king is taking away the squares in front of the king, but right here we have our king on A1, not in check. So this is another one of those stalemates that if you're not careful, you can walk yourself into and not win the game when you have a clear victory. Okay? So let's kind of summarize what we've talked about so far. We've talked about that checkmates are rarely going to happen in the middle of the board. You're rarely going to be able to mate somebody in the middle of the board unless you have so much material. Okay? So let's say you have so much material that you can mate in the middle of the board. Well, if you had a queen and a couple of rooks, sure. There's checkmate right in the middle of the board. Can it happen? Yes, but it's not going to happen often. These are principles that are going to hold for most games. You're going to be able to take and apply to just about every game. Push the king to the edge of the board, drive it out of the center, and when you don't have an overwhelming material advantage like two rooks or a queen and a rook, your king is going to have to take part. Okay? So if you have two major pieces, use the staircase. If you have one major piece, what you'll do, and so when we're talking about major pieces, what we're talking about is the queen and the rook. You have minor pieces like the bishop and the knight. Bishop and knight, it's harder to win a game than with the rook and the queen. You have to use the king, and generally you need more of them. So use closing the box. So shrink that box, push the king to the side of the board, and then face to face mate from the side is a really easy pattern. Once you know it, once you've practiced it, you'll stop losing the games that you've already won. Okay? There's an old quote, I don't remember who said it at this point in time, but the hardest thing to win is a one game. So if you're a beginner, if you're just starting out, make sure you apply this, you learn it so that you never lose the game that you should have won. Okay? The last thing is avoid your stalemates. Watch out for those opportunities that your king is taking away all of the squares and your queen or your rook is taking away the rest of the flight squares and you're not giving check. So when we talk about closing that box, you do need to pay attention that you're not closing it so tight that you're not giving check and you're creating a stalemate. All right. So minimum required material. You have to have a king on the board. So if you have a king and the other guy has a king, you can mate with a king and a queen. We've seen that checkmate, okay? You can mate with a king and a rook. That is a checkmate. You can even mate with two bishops. So if you have a king and you have two bishops, okay, so you have two bishops, one of each color, something like this. Now, I'm not going to go into detail right now on how to create this mate. I'm just targeting the basics. But you can checkmate if you have two bishops. Okay? Later on, if I get enough interest, I'll show these checkmates too. Okay? You can actually checkmate with a bishop and a knight. If you have a king, a bishop, and a knight, it's actually pretty difficult to pull off in a game. Very few people will ever do it. But you can actually have checkmate. So the king is taking away these two squares, the bishop takes away this one, and the knight delivers checkmate. So it is possible to mate with a rook and a bishop. A knight and a bishop can give checkmate. It's just not going to be very often, and probably not worth your time learning it, because it's about a 20 to 30 move sequence where you have to play the right move. And it's going to show up so infrequently. Most of the time, you're going to be able to sack one of those pieces for a pawn, end up with a queen, and you're going to end up winning the game much easier in a different way. Can it happen? Yes. If you were a grandmaster, would it be worth putting the time in? Maybe. Even then, I'm not sure it would be worth it. So, yes, you can win with this material, but it's probably not worth the time to learn it. And then the final way to win, you can actually win with 3 knights. Again, what's the chances you're going to have 3 knights? Almost none. If you've got the opportunity for 3 knights, why wouldn't you already have a queen? So can you win with 3 knights? Sure, it can happen. So take away the squares. We've given check. We've taken these 2 squares away. But the problem is at this position, you can't actually create this position, because where would check have come? Like the knight comes in here with check, which is why you actually need 3 knights to be able to make it a possible thing that you give checkmate in. So again, 2 knights can't give checkmate, which is probably the most surprising thing that people think about with endgames, is because if we're in this position right now, yes, if white to move, we could do checkmate, but you couldn't get into this position because black would have been stalemated. Because black would have... So if we're here, you're in check, black king just runs away. So instead, they walked in, and the knight could give check. So this, I guess, is what you would call a helpmate. Black is committing suicide. It's really just walking in and asking to be mated. So can you mate with 2 knights? Yes, but only if black helps you. You can force checkmate with 3 knights, but it's not worth learning any sort of pattern with that. Just get the queen instead. So I think that covers our endgame conversation.